Welcome to the Near Memo, a weekly conversation about search, social, and commerce. What happened, why it matters, and the implications for local. Welcome back to the Near Memo, episode 49, or season 2, episode 4. And I'm Greg Sterling. I'm here as always with Mike Blumenthal and David Mim to talk about search, social, and commerce and what happened this week that's interesting or controversial or fun. And we're gonna lead off with a sort of a funny and somewhat stupid item today, which is the capture of Google's old Google My Business Facebook page by a fake reviews vendor that sells Google reviews. So, Mike, why don't you tell us what happened?
So in November, when Google switched the brand from Google My Business to Google Business Profile, they switched all the URLs, and in doing so, changed the name of their Facebook page and let the Google Facebook.com/Google My Business go away. And a spammer picked it up and started selling Google reviews on that page. I asked him how much they were. The good news is they're only $4 a review. And bad. Not bad at all. But as many as you want. And I just thought this is such as you pointed out, an amazing.
Is there a bulk
metaphor.
Discount, Mike? Did you get that far?
I didn't get that far. But I did get to $4. It's just a metaphor for how screwed up the review space is, that Google has not, been able to control the value or minimize the value of fake reviews. And it's a metaphor for how bad moderation is at Facebook, that a business that claims to be selling Google reviews, there's no
pretense of legitimacy.
No pretense. Made it through whatever moderation they don't have in place to take over this spot. So when you do a search for Google My Business Facebook support, buy Google reviews is the first page that comes up. It just shows you where we are in the world of reviews.
It's really astounding. It's a kind of a marketing negligence example on Google's part,
Totally that.
It does give me some comfort that Google's atrocious efforts at branding and local have finally come back to bite them at some point. So there's a little bit of comedic justice to that.
And Joy pointed out how many links they let go. It's like that page, the Google Facebook page, was linked by everybody. So
it's do as I say, not as I do. The old adage.
Yeah, I guess it's just rewards at some level.
Speaking of Google, we're going to talk about the pretty significant change that happened this week. Google abandoning its sort of flock approach to next generation ad targeting, the post cookies privacy safe experiment that they were running, and
ostensibly privacy safe.
Well, yes.
If you take Google's word for it, so
right.
Yeah.
So at least in theory, it was much more privacy friendly than cookies, and they walked away from it in its completely and announced a new approach called Topics, which we'll discuss. But I think the motivation for doing that is that there was widespread opposition, WordPress in particular, and others who would come out against it and said that they would block it or not participate. So there was a pretty significant opposition to it. But David, you want to talk more about it?
Yeah, no, I just I'm sort of selfishly want to talk a little bit more about it because it gives me a chance to expand on a sort of throwaway comment I made on last week's Near Memo, which is that I see digital advertising generally moving more into the world of the pendulum swinging more towards contextual and away from behavioral. And I think that Google's announcement of Topics is a reflection of their realization of that comment as well, in that so the Topics API essentially is a set of Google defined topics by which they categorize certain websites, and they're very broad. In my opinion, they're very, sports is a category, right? Or lifestyle or fashion
and
or whatever.
Just to interject, this is a concern that marketers have raised, that the categories are too broad. There's not enough granularity. Yeah,
for sure. I mean, sports could be everything from, bowling to golf, which are demographically fairly different, consumer groups that are going to be kind of reading things about those sports. So anyway, the proposal from Google is that they will sort of anonymously tag a user's visitation of sites that fit into these categories and allow advertisers to target this sort of behavioral pattern over just a 3-week period. So I think I would say to Google's credit, like this is a fairly limited window of behavioral patterns that you're tracking. But the flip side of that is that it still requires browser support, which coming from Apple and Mozilla and Brave and other browsers seems like there's no incentive for those browsers whatsoever to support this new proposal from Google. So, Mike, you made I don't know if it was a funny or a true statement, but it's going to cost Google a lot of money if they want to get Safari on board with this new program. So I still think it's probably DOA, and I think that the pendulum will continue to shift even more in the contextual direction because it's the only thing that truly is, privacy sensitive. It doesn't track anything except what's in front of you on the screen. So that's my general take. Is I think all of these behavioral aggregations or abstractions that Google is trying to put together, I think, are not going to have very broad support from any publishers or browsers.
I like it. I like it. I don't mind the behavioral dimension to it, given the 3-week window, assuming that it's executed as discussed. I mean, I think there is a lot of evidence. I'm writing today in the newsletter about Google Boston Consulting Group study about privacy, ad relevance, and personal data. And consumers consistently say that they want relevant ads. They're not seeing ads that are relevant enough to them. And so I think this is a nice compromise between contextual and behavioral. I like the idea that consumers will have the ability to control the categories that they're being targeted for, if it truly is easy to use. And I think that Google's done a nice job. Now, I think marketers are going to have a lot of concerns about the targeting capabilities. And maybe you're right, David, that other browsers won't support it, and thus it's kind of just an academic discussion. But I think that they've done a good job in sort of migrating from something that was more problematic to something which is much more reasonable, and I think balances the interests here. So I support this. I think that they've done a pretty good job.
And I would say even if the non-Google browsers sign on to this, I do think that the categories are so broad at this point that they're hardly useful or only marginally useful, and that where you would really see a benefit from a particular ad is the context, right? So even if you're, even in the world of traditional media, a certain set of brands is advertising on NFL games because they know that topic attracts a certain audience, and you don't really need you don't need to know what I did the 3 weeks before I watched the Bills Chiefs game. So,
well, it returns to kind of a TV-like demographic, old style newspaper approach or magazine approach. Here's our audience, and you can
that's right,
target them. So that's a big difference from what marketers have access to today, which is very granular data. I mean, one response is for Google to really blow out the categories and make them much more specific, and I suspect we'll see something like that happen.
So first question is, this doesn't affect Google's first party information.
No, exactly.
It will make their ads much better.
That's right.
Or more targetable.
As we've said for the last year with all of these privacy initiatives, that these only reinforce the strength of Google, Facebook, and Amazon.
Yeah, this is kind of a central problem, and I think Ben Evans has pointed this out, if I remember correctly. The idea that the German publishers, Axel Springer and others, are appealing to courts in Germany to prevent Google from abandoning cookies because they benefit from them, and so like these independent publishers, these news publishers, will suffer under this new, more privacy favorable regime. So by advancing the interests of consumers in privacy, you're disadvantaging the smaller publishers and putting Google and Facebook and Amazon and a few others into a position of even greater power, which is what the GDPR did in Europe for the big platforms, even though that was an unintended consequence.
Although cookies are a privacy nightmare, and Gruber made John Gruber at Daring Fireball compared the German complaints to a pawnbroker who complained that he couldn't get as many goods because the police were cracking down on house thefts, which I thought was very appropriate. It's like, how could the European court possibly agree not to reduce the use of cookies, which are a privacy nightmare?
Well, I mean, the GDPR explicitly requires opt-in consent, right? So it's an theoretically anti-cookie privacy scheme. But, I mean, there may be some disingenuousness there, but it's
some.
Yeah. Well, I think they just don't have they don't have the resources that the big platforms do to come up with alternatives.
Right.
Thanks for joining David, Mike, and Greg. To stay on top of the latest developments in local, subscribe to our newsletter at nearmedia.co. We'll see you next week.